Hi, this is LA, a subarctic beekeeper, one of the many. I am at Happy Creek Farm, north of Fairbanks, Alaska. And I want to talk to you today about feeding your bees. It's late May here. Last week and all of 2 days we had green up, which means that we went from trees with no leaves to, bam, trees with leaves. Up here, our leaves start developing inside the bud. Once that bud opens, the leaves are already almost full size. And so, I don't think we had a spring. We went from 91 inches of snow and cold, freezing temperatures up into the 50s, and then the next week up into the 60s and 70s during the day. At this point now, our nights are not going down into freezing temperatures, which is great. Which means the bees that are on the deck in the hive pod still are no longer being heated from the bottom, and I can leave the front doors open all night long without worrying about them. And they've been out flying around as much as they possibly can, bringing back some pollen, which has got to be from the willow and the birch, because there's nothing else that's blooming. We have no sources of nectar in our area of the woods. While I have stopped giving them pollen substitute, because they can bring in their own pollen, which is great because it's nutritious for them and it's good for them, I'm still feeding them syrup. Reason being is that they can't get it naturally. So sugar syrup mimics nectar. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. It has no nutritional value whatsoever. So I add some things to mine. I add some lemon juice to adjust the pH so it's easier for the bees to digest. I add chaga, which is a mushroom that grows on the birch tree. It actually grows from an injury that happened to the tree, but it's got all kinds of trace minerals and healing properties to it. You can look it up. I add spearmint oil and lemongrass oil and borage oil. Lemongrass oil attracts the bees and it offers vitamins and trace minerals. Spearmint the same thing, borage the same thing. So it boosts up the nutrient value of that sugar syrup. The bees need the nutrients in order to help them fend off varroa and tracheal mites. I want our bees to be as healthy as possible. If I'm just feeding them sugar syrup, they're not going to be as strong. The colonies won't build up as fast. And so using the sugar syrup also encourages the queen to lay because she thinks there's a nectar flow going on. And it encourages the bees to build comb. So there's empty frames in some of the hives right now, and the bees are drawing out that comb, which is precious. Without that comb, the queen can't lay. I am waiting for things to bloom. I have planted quite a few things for my bees that I'm pretty surprised aren't blooming, such as Siberian squill. I've got hascat berries. Those are both early bloomers. So I'm not sure what happened. Global warming? I'm not sure what else to attribute it to. We lost the month of March, which is normally a chilly month here, and then April, which is chilly but warming up. That's where we see the changes happening. And for the last, decade or so, our April temperatures have been warm enough to start the snow melting. And then in May, our snow is essentially on its last legs, and then we go into June. So we're able to observe things that are happening with the soil temperature and the weather by observing what's growing and what's not growing. And so in the spring, one of the things we look for is when the birch and alder trees pop, when green up happens. When that happens, that means the soil is warm enough for us to plant. When I first moved up here, over 30 years ago, we couldn't plant until June 1st because it was guaranteed we'd have a freeze up before June 1st. Since then, the earliest I've been able to plant is in April. Then typically it's been in May, more recently. According to the University of Alaska Fairbanks, our growing season has increased by 30 days in the last 30 years. That's quite a bit. That's a global warming trend. But right now, we have the green up, like I said, and we can plant, but still nothing's blooming. In the fall, one of the things that we use to determine what the heck's going on and how we need to prepare, or when we need to start preparing for the next season, is with fireweed. Fireweed is a tall flower. It starts blooming from the bottom and then it gradually goes up to the top. When the fireweed starts to bloom at the bottom, we are heading into the end of summer. By the time the fireweed gets to the top, that means winter's coming. That means it's time to close shop and get everything packed up and ready for winter. It also means that we're going into a pollen dearth here because fireweed is the last thing to bloom here in terms of wildflowers. However, I've planted for my bees, and clover will last longer than fireweed. I don't know if I should talk over this train or not. There's no competition. The train is clearly winning, but I'm going to keep trying to finish this podcast. By planting for my bees and planting that clover, I've been able to get weeks, if not a month, past the fireweed and the natural pollen dearth of our environment. So the bees are still able to forage. With our spring not happening this year and us going from winter into summer, I'm hoping we have a long autumn. But if that happens, what we're going to have is a longer pollen dearth where all the bees get to forage is clover and anything else that's been planted for them that lasts longer than the fireweed. So that means going into winter, what the bees will be putting away for stores will be, in my case, clover and sugar syrup, feeding again, but this time at a 2-to-1 ratio to encourage them to build stores, because the sugar syrup that's made with a 2-to-1 ratio mimics late season nectar. And the honeybees take that and store it in their honeycomb as if they're storing honey for winter. Those of us who use more northern breeds of bees have bees that are more in tune with our environment, with our temperature changes, which is great. Whereas if you have Italian bees up here, they don't know what's going on. They don't ever experience a winter like ours. So the Russians and the Carnies will put up stores, and they're more in sync with what's going on with our temperature changes. So the bees will take that 2-to-1 sugar syrup and the pollen they get from clover, and they'll pack it away to be consumed during the winter as stores. And the reason we feed them 2-to-1 instead of leaving honey inside the hive is that 2-to-1 syrup, when it gets packed up, has a lower moisture content. So there's less of a need for the bees to defecate. If we left honey in our hives, it's a higher moisture content, and the bees would need to defecate, which means they wouldn't survive being hived up for 6 months or 7 months, depending on what's happening with our seasons. So I was just listening to a talk by Dr. May Brayerburn. I hope I said her name correctly. Please forgive me if I didn't. She's absolutely brilliant. And she was talking about nutrition with honeybees and how honey is a food specifically made for honeybees, and it helps them resist disease. It keeps them strong. It helps them resist mites. It helps them, build their colonies and such. And so I'm thinking that way up here in the far north, when our bees don't have access to natural pollen sources from all the different flowers and such, and we're feeding them pollen substitute, the stores that they're putting away don't have the same nutritional value as they would if what they were putting away was honey. But we can't do that up here. So it's a catch-22. So it's something I'm going to be thinking about. Anyway, you are probably far into your spring or summer season by now and probably not feeding your bees. I'm going to feed until I see the first dandelion, and hopefully that's soon. Take care of yourselves and take care of your bees. Say some prayers for Ukraine. If you want to learn more about subarctic beekeeping and Happy Creek Farm, we have an Instagram page and a Facebook page and a Twitter. And I think we're going to start TikToking soon. And it's all under Happy Creek Farm, and we're up in Alaska. This podcast is copyrighted and all rights reserved.